They rejected him for being too small. So at 19, Audie Murphy climbed onto a burning tank destroyer loaded with 750 liters of fuel and single-handedly stopped 6 Panzers and 250 German veterans with one .50 caliber machine gun. This is the day a 50 kg orphan proved he was more lethal than an entire battalion. January 26th, 1945. Holzwihr, Alsace. The temperature hovered between 20 and 25 degrees Celsius, cold enough to freeze breath to rifle barrels. Across a wide, open field of snow, 400 meters of nothing. Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy watched the tree line opposite him begin to move. He was 19 years old, 60 kilograms, 165 centimeters tall. The Marines had rejected him for being too short. The paratroopers rejected him for being too light. Even the army that reluctantly accepted him believed he wouldn't survive his first firefight. Now, he stood alone, 40 meters in front of the only cover his men had left. A thin tree line where 18 exhausted Americans crouched. 18 out of the 120 who had gone into the forest just 48 hours earlier. Murphy was the youngest officer in the entire regiment. He had no business being alive, let alone in command. But the battlefield didn't care about height requirements or paperwork. It only cared about what a man would do when everything else collapsed. Without warning, the world erupted. German artillery smashed into the frozen earth around Murphy's position, exploding wider and deadlier than in soft ground. Shrapnel hissed through the air like hornets. Snow became dust. Trees snapped. The telephone line beside him, the only thing connecting him to artillery support, miraculously held. Then came silence. A silence so unnatural Murphy immediately knew. This wasn't the end of the attack, this was the setup. Moments later he heard it. Engines. Heavy ones. Shapes emerged through the white blur at the far tree line. 6 German Panzers, advancing in formation. Snow piled on their hulls like armor plating. Behind them, spread out in disciplined rows, came more than 200 Gebirgsjäger, winter warfare veterans, hardened in Finland and Norway. These weren't rear echelon troops, these were killers. Murphy counted quickly. Maybe 250 men. 6 tanks, open ground, perfect visibility for the enemy. 18 Americans with rifles, and him, one lieutenant in a shallow hole, holding a field phone and a decision no one 9-year-old should ever have to make. If the Germans reached the tree line, Company B was finished. Murphy didn't hesitate. He grabbed the phone and issued the order no officer wants to give. Fall back, get to cover. I'll stay forward and call the artillery. We're Team 7. His men stared at him, disbelieving. Was he coming with them? Murphy answered without looking up. Someone has to stay. If you not seeing 9, with a dull calm. As the 18 survivors retreated, Murphy remained, alone, in front of a burning field, watching 6 tanks and 250 infantry advance straight at him. The army had rejected him for being too small. In the next hour, this too small orphan would hold off an entire German assault by himself from the deck of a vehicle designed to explode. And this is where the impossible began. Murphy pressed the cold receiver of the field telephone to his ear. The German tanks were now halfway across the field, infantry flooding behind them like a white tide. He exhaled. Once. Fire mission. End. His voice was calm, too calm for a man facing 6 Panzers alone. Coordinates. Range. Adjustments. He rattled them off with the precision of a man who had been calling artillery for longer than he had been considered an adult. A distant rumble answered him. Then the sky tore open. The first salvo slammed into the snow 200 meters in front of the enemy line too far. Murphy didn't flinch. Drop 50. Shift right 20. Is different intensive. The second barrage landed directly among the German infantry. White uniforms disappeared in bursts of black earth. Men fell. Others stumbled blindly in the smoke. For a moment, just a moment, Murphy thought the barrage might break the assault entirely. But the Panzers kept coming. They pushed through the explosions without fear, engines growling, armor plates dusted with fresh snow. Behind them, the surviving infantry spread out, slipping into shell craters, bounding forward with the precision only elite mountain troops possessed. Artillery alone wouldn't stop them. Murphy saw the truth before anyone else could have said it. The Germans would reach the tree line, and when they did, 18 Americans would die. Then came the turning point. A thunderous crack split the air. A German 75mm round punched into the flank of the nearest M10 Wolverine supporting Company B. The shot hit like a hammer. The side armor, 25mm thin, might as well have been paper. The tank destroyer lit up instantly, flames roaring from the engine compartment. Diesel spilled onto the snow, igniting into a black, oily blaze. The crew bailed out, sprinting toward the tree line. The vehicle continued to burn, ammunition cooking inside. Murphy's eyes locked onto something most soldiers would have ignored. The Browning .50 caliber machine gun on the turret. Still mounted, still intact, still loaded. Below it, 54 rounds of high explosive 76 2mm shells, 750 liters of diesel fuel, a furnace waiting to explode. In front of it, 6 tanks, 250 veteran infantry. Murphy felt the heat of the burning M10 from 50 meters away. He knew exactly what would happen if the ammo detonated. He also knew something else. Only that, .50 caliber, had the firepower to stop the Germans before they reached his men. His decision took less than a heartbeat. He dropped the field telephone. He stepped out of his shallow foxhole, and as bullets snapped past him and tanks crawled closer, Audie Murphy ran toward the burning tank destroyer, toward the fire, toward the danger, toward the only place on the battlefield where one man could decide the fate of 17 others. The army had said he was too small. The battlefield was about to disagree. Murphy reached the burning M10 as rounds cracked around him, snapping branches, kicking snow into his face. Heat rolled off the tank destroyer like the breath of a furnace. Diesel flames licked along the engine deck, black smoke churning upward in twisting columns. Any logical man would have kept running. Murphy climbed. The metal scorched his gloves the moment he touched it. He dragged himself onto the engine deck, boots slipping on soot and ice. Inside the turret, ammunition glowed faintly red as the fire crept closer. He could hear the panzers now, the grinding of treads, the clatter of steel on frozen earth, the mechanical growl of engines pushing through the barrage. But above all else, he heard something far more urgent, the frantic shouts of German infantry closing in. Murphy spun the M2HB toward the advancing line. The .50 was already loaded 300 rounds of raw authority, waiting to speak. He gripped the butterfly trigger. At 14:17, he opened fire. The Browning roared to life, its recoil hammering into his shoulder, tracers slicing across the snow like red-hot needles. At 150 meters, at 120 meters, at 90, Murphy couldn't miss. The first German fell, then the next. Then an entire cluster of men vanished behind a curtain of .50 cal fire. The Gebirgsjäger had fought in Finland, in Norway, in conditions far worse than this, but they had never faced a 19-year-old standing on top of a burning tank destroyer, firing a heavy machine gun like it weighed nothing. Bullets from MG-42S and Kar 98KS shredded the air around him. Rounds struck the M10's hull in sharp, ringing impacts. Ting, ting, ting. Dozens of hits. Hundreds. Murphy was exposed from 3 sides. Front, left, right. He fought all 3. He swung the Browning in a wide arc, the barrel beginning to glow, sparks spiraling off the muzzle. German infantry tried to sprint between shell craters. He cut them down mid-stride. Others tried crawling from cover to cover. Murphy anticipated their movement and fired before they stood. He didn't waste rounds. 6 to 8 round bursts. Always center mass. Always lethal. In minutes, the snow was littered with bodies. The panzers, now deprived of infantry support, hesitated. They slowed, then stopped. A tank can crush a trench. It cannot advance blind. Murphy was now the sole reason they weren't crossing the field. But the Germans regrouped. The second wave. More infantry pushed forward in tighter formations, using fallen comrades as cover. They crept through smoke, through craters, through drifting snow. A machine gunner rose to fire. Murphy shot him before he could squeeze the trigger, then shot the assistant gunner. Then, the replacement. He targeted officers next. Men, pointing, shouting, directing the assault. When a leader fell, the squads wavered, freezing for crucial seconds. Murphy harvested those seconds, like a surgeon, but the fire behind him burned hotter. His boots began to soften from the heat radiating through the steel. His face was streaked with soot, eyes watering, hands blistering. Still, he fired. The third wave, 3 directions at once. At 14:35, the Germans launched their most desperate assault. A squad broke left. Another pushed center. Another crawled along a drainage ditch to his right, close, too close. If they reached the M10, it was over. Murphy spun the 50 to the right, firing a long, savage burst. 8 Germans collapsed in seconds. The rest tumbled backward into the ditch, too terrified to continue. Back to the front, targets at 50 meters, then 40, then 25. The barrel of the Browning glowed dull orange. The ammo belt sagged almost empty. Murphy fired in single shots now, each round a surgical strike. He didn't waste movement, didn't waste breath, didn't waste fear. A German squad rose as one unit at 20 meters. He met them with a burst that ripped through their smocks like paper. Then, click, nothing. The belt was empty. At that exact moment, a German mortar round exploded 5 meters from the M10. Shrapnel tore into Murphy's left leg, punching through muscle. Blood soaked his trousers. He didn't even look down. Another German rose, 10 yards away, the closest any had come. Murphy pulled the trigger again out of instinct. Click. Nothing. The fight, for the first time in an hour, fell silent. Smoke rose from the M10 in thick black waves. The engine deck beneath him was nearly molten. German infantry, what remained of them, were retreating, dragging wounded through the snow. Murphy, bleeding, burned, exhausted, finally stepped off the tank destroyer. He had held the entire German attack by himself, not because he wanted glory, but because 18 men were behind him, and he refused to let them die. Murphy limped off the burning M10, boots half melted, left leg bleeding through torn fabric. The world around him was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that only comes after too much violence. The Germans were withdrawing, stumbling back toward the tree line they had come from. Without infantry support, the panzers reversed, one by one, treads grinding into the frozen earth, metal groaning under the strain of retreat. The field he had defended alone was no longer white. It was carved with craters, scorched with fire, and littered with bodies half buried in drifting snow. Murphy didn't pause. He didn't sit. He didn't let the pain into his voice. He limped the 50 meters back toward the American tree line, dragging the weight of his wounded leg with each step. The 18 remaining men of Company B stared at him as though he were a ghost. A medic rushed forward. Murphy waved him off. "Where's my company? Which he see?" His voice was steady, almost annoyed. The medic pointed. Murphy walked straight past him, straight past the foxholes, straight to the field telephone. He picked it up with burned hands. Fire on the retreating infantry, Orsay. The 39th Field Artillery answered instantly. Shells whistled overhead and crashed into the withdrawing Germans, tearing the snowfield open in violent blossoms of fire. Most officers would have ended the day right there. Most men would have collapsed into the snow. Murphy didn't. He turned to his exhausted, frozen, half-shattered company, men who had just watched him do the impossible. "We're going back," he said. Not a suggestion, not a debate, a statement. His men hesitated. They had just survived annihilation. They had seen a lone lieutenant hold back 6 tanks and 250 infantry. Now he wanted to attack? Murphy didn't repeat himself. He picked up an M1 carbine from a wounded soldier, chambered around, and stepped out of the tree line, limping, bleeding, soot-covered, but walking forward all the same. One by one, the 18 survivors rose and followed him. They formed a skirmish line behind their lieutenant, the only officer they had left, the only reason they were still alive. the only man on the field still eager to advance. Artillery walked ahead of them in measured bursts, 100 meters at a time. Every time German stragglers tried to regroup, Murphy called new fire missions with the same cold precision he had shown earlier. The Americans pressed forward across the field Murphy had just defended alone. They advanced past the burning M10, past the bodies in the snow, past the point where German troops had closed to just 10 yards from their lieutenant. Finally, 200 meters beyond Murphy's original command post, they reached the tree line the Germans had abandoned. There was no resistance, no counterfire, no counterattack. Murphy had broken them. He halted the line, checked his remaining men, and ordered consolidation. The fight was over. Holzfeuer was theirs. Only then, at nearly 1,600 hours, did he finally allow the medic to treat his wounds. 12 stitches, multiple fragments removed, a third Purple Heart earned in silence. But there was no triumph in Murphy's face, just the calm of a man who had done what needed to be done because no one else could have done it. The snowfield at Holzfeuer froze over that night, sealing the scars left by one man's refusal to break. On January 27th, the day after the battle, Murphy's commanders filed the paperwork. One line in the recommendation said everything. His actions saved Company B from annihilation, which Murphy didn't think about medals. He didn't ask for praise. He didn't even stay in the rear for long. He returned to duty 2 weeks later, bandaged leg and all. But the Army could no longer ignore what had happened. On June 2nd, 1945, on the French Riviera, 7th Army Commander Lieutenant General Alexander Patch stood before the entire 3rd Infantry Division. Murphy walked forward, still baby-faced, still slight of frame, and received the Medal of Honor. His citation documented numbers almost too large to believe. 6 tanks repelled, 250 infantry engaged, 50 killed or wounded by Murphy alone. 1 hour under fire from 3 sides. Enemy closing to within 10 yards. He was 19. By the end of the war, Murphy had 33 decorations, 241 officially credited kills, 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Silver Stars, the Distinguished Service Cross, the Legion of Honor, and the title, the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II. He had enlisted at 17, weighing only 110 pounds. If this story moved you, it's because men like Audie Murphy remind us of something we forget too easily. Courage isn't born in perfect bodies or perfect circumstances. It isn't measured in height or weight or rank. It's measured in the moment when every rational voice says, run, and one person decides to stand. Murphy didn't fight because he wanted medals. He didn't climb onto a burning tank destroyer because he thought anyone would remember his name. He did it because 18 men behind him needed someone to buy them 1 more minute of life, and he gave them an hour. So if you felt something from this story, honor him in the way that matters most. Keep his memory alive. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Every single interaction pushes this story to someone who's never heard of the 9-year-old orphan who stopped an army. You're not just a viewer. You're a guardian of memory, one of the people making sure heroes like Audie Murphy don't vanish into silence. Thank you for watching, and thank you for standing with us as we bring these forgotten moments of World War II back into the light. He fought 27 months overseas. He survived 9 campaigns. He saved lives in Sicily, Anzio, southern France, and Alsace. He never once called himself a hero. He said only, I just did what needed to be done. Okay. After the war, America tried to turn the boy into a symbol. Hollywood came calling. Murphy acted in 44 films, including To Hell and Back, the adaptation of his own autobiography, where he played himself because no one else could. The movie became one of the highest-grossing films of the decade. Audiences thought they were watching exaggeration. They weren't. Murphy had deliberately toned it down. On May 28th, 1971, Murphy died in a plane crash on Brush Mountain, Virginia. He was 45 years old. No survivors. On June 7th, he was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 46, with full military honors. His grave is one of the most visited in the entire cemetery, second only to President John F. Kennedy's. People come from across America, not for the movie star, for the soldier, for the boy who was told he was too small, too weak, too light, and answered by fighting harder than anyone in his generation. Military officers still study his battle at Holzfire. Psychologists still debate whether courage on that scale can be taught. The consensus is the same as it was in 1945. You cannot train a man to do what Audie Murphy did, because it wasn't about strength, or rank, or firepower. It was about something deeper, the absolute refusal to let his men die when he could still stand and fight. On that frozen field in Alsace, surrounded by tanks, machine guns, and 250 German infantry, a 19-year-old lieutenant made a choice. The Germans would not pass. Not while he was still breathing, and that is why his name endures. What you just watched wasn't a movie. It wasn't Hollywood. It was a 19-year-old kid rejected for being too small, standing on a burning tank destroyer and stopping 6 Panzers and 250 German veterans by himself. Let that sink in. If this story doesn't deserve to be heard, nothing does. So, do me one favor. Don't let Audie Murphy disappear from YouTube's algorithm. Hit like right now so this video gets pushed to more people. Smash subscribe so you don't miss the next insane WW2 story. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We read every single one. Because the more you interact, the more YouTube shows this story to someone who's never heard of the most underestimated, unstoppable soldier America ever produced. Algorithms forget. People forget, but you don't have to. Keep his legacy alive. Make sure the world remembers Audie Murphy. The story of Audie Murphy is not just another war story. It is not simply a tale of bravery or tactics or the mechanics of battlefield heroism. It is a lesson in what a human being is capable of when stripped to the core, when rank, status, physical size, and every external measure fall away, leaving only the internal engine of character and will. Murphy teaches us more about the human condition than he does about warfare. His stand at Holzfire is the kind of moment that forces us to rethink what courage truly means and where it comes from. Murphy's life began with disadvantage. Born into poverty, orphaned young, forced into adulthood at 16, he learned early that survival often depended on silence, patience, and precision. He hunted not for sport, but to keep his siblings alive. He endured not because he was strong, but because he had no other choice. This is the first and perhaps greatest lesson of his story. Courage is not born on battlefields. It is shaped quietly in the small, harsh corners of life. The hardships that nearly break us are often the ones that prepare us for the moments when breaking is not an option. When the Marines rejected him for being too short, and the paratroopers refused him for being too light, Murphy did not protest. He did not complain about fairness or fate. He accepted the humiliation and kept moving forward. And here lies another lesson, one that modern life often obscures. The world does not owe you belief. You must create the proof yourself. It is not the opinions of others that define potential, but the refusal to let those opinions become your limits. On the battlefield, Murphy never sought glory. He did not chase medals. He never positioned himself for recognition. He did what needed doing. That is all. But in doing what needed doing, he demonstrated something profound. Heroism is rarely loud in intention, only in result. The truly courageous do not announce their courage. They act because someone must. The Battle of Holzfire crystallizes every lesson his life had prepared him to learn. When the German force emerged from the tree line, 6 armored panzers and 250 winter-trained infantry, Murphy had mere seconds to decide whether he would act or retreat. Most reasonable officers would have fallen back without hesitation. The odds were impossible. The logic was simple. 18 remaining American soldiers could not face such a force and live. But Murphy did not measure the moment by odds. He measured it by responsibility. He saw the field differently than most. Where others saw an overwhelming enemy, He saw 18 men who would die unless someone bought them time, and so he made a decision that reveals the deepest lesson of all. Leadership is choosing burden over safety, duty over comfort, and the lives of others over one's own fear. Climbing onto the burning M10 was not bravery, it was clarity. Clarity that if he did nothing, his men would be overrun. Clarity that no one else could replace the role he needed to fill. Clarity that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. The flames beneath him, the ammunition that could detonate at any second, the bullets snapping from 3 sides, none of these were abstractions. He knew exactly what they meant, and he stayed anyway. Murphy's stand teaches us that greatness often comes from people the world underestimates. He was small, quiet, unassuming. He didn't look like a warrior. He didn't speak like one. And yet, in the moment when everything hung in the balance, he became the immovable line that decided life from death. It reminds us not to judge the potential of others based on appearances, and more importantly, not to judge our own potential based on how others see us. Consider the precision with which Murphy fought. He fired in short bursts, adjusted with every movement of the enemy, prioritized leaders to disrupt squad cohesion, and maintained emotional control even as his boots melted and shrapnel tore into his leg. This teaches something vital. Skill matters, but composure under pressure matters more. In every high-stakes moment of life, whether in battle, in crisis, or in personal trials, those who remain calm when others panic become the anchor everyone else depends on. His refusal to quit after the machine gun ran dry reveals yet another truth. Mental endurance outlasts physical strength. Murphy was wounded, burned, exhausted, and still he limped back to his men, called artillery on the retreat, and led a counterattack. Pain did not stop him. Fear did not stop him. Even the rational understanding that he had done more than enough did not stop him. He did not measure effort by fairness. He measured it by responsibility. After the war, Murphy rejected the label hero. He insisted he only did what anyone would have done. But the world knows otherwise. Anyone did not do it. He did. And in that distinction lies one of the most painful lessons his story gives us. Extraordinary people rarely see themselves as extraordinary. They feel fear, doubt, exhaustion, just like everyone else. The difference is what they do in spite of those feelings. The final lesson for Murphy's life is perhaps the most important. Courage does not guarantee survival, but it guarantees meaning. Murphy died young, not in battle but in an accident, and yet his legacy endures because he lived with conviction in the moments that mattered most. He reminds us that a life does not need to be long to be full. It needs only to be lived without surrender. In the end, the story of Audie Murphy is not about a boy who became a hero. It is about what every person becomes when stripped of excuses. Strength that comes from hardship, courage that comes from necessity, leadership that comes from responsibility, legacy that comes from sacrifice. And above all, the size of a person has nothing to do with the size of their courage. What Audie Murphy teaches us about fear, duty, and the human limit, ***. Audie Murphy's story forces us to confront a question most people avoid their entire lives. What determines what a person is truly capable of? Is it strength, size, education, background, training? Or is it something far less visible, an inner decision, made quietly, often under unbearable pressure, that separates those who act from those who hesitate? To understand Murphy's lessons, we cannot look only at the hour he fought atop the burning M10. We must examine the years before, the landscape of his childhood, the emotional scars, the responsibilities he never asked for, and the way each challenge hardened him not into a violent man, but into a resilient one. The weight of early responsibility. Murphy's life from the beginning was steeped in necessity. Growing up in a sharecropper family in East Texas during the Great Depression meant hunger was not a metaphor, it was a near-daily visitor. When his father abandoned the family and his mother died shortly after, Murphy was forced into adulthood instantly, becoming caretaker to 12 siblings. And here lies the first deep truth. Responsibility accepted early becomes strength later. Responsibility avoided becomes weakness later. Murphy never had the luxury of asking, "Why me?" End quote. He simply did what needed to be done. Modern society often encourages people to reject responsibility, to avoid burden, to chase comfort, to retreat from difficulty. But Murphy's life shows the opposite truth. Burden is what builds the internal infrastructure for greatness. Hunting to feed his siblings was not training for war, yet it trained things far more important than shooting: patience, observation, the ability to regulate fear, and the calm needed to act decisively under pressure. Murphy's rejections by the Marines and paratroopers reveal another profound lesson about human nature. We often mismeasure others and ourselves by external markers: height, weight, voice, appearance, background, credentials. But life repeatedly shows that greatness rarely comes packaged in expected forms. Murphy looked like a boy. He spoke softly. He did not have the imposing presence of a warrior. Yet inside him lived a determination far more powerful than muscle. The world judges the surface. History judges the substance. This is why Murphy's story resonates so powerfully with people who have been underestimated. He became living proof that external doubt cannot define internal capability unless we allow it to. It is tempting to believe Murphy was fearless, but that does his story a disservice. He felt fear. He felt uncertainty. He felt the same instinct to survive that every soldier feels. But here is the difference. Fear told him the price of failure, not the impossibility of victory. When he chose to stay forward while his men retreated, it was not fearlessness that motivated him, it was clarity. If he stayed, his men lived. If he left, they died. In moments of true crisis, decisions simplify. Fear becomes irrelevant compared to responsibility. Courage, then, is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear make the decision. Murphy continued the fight even when wounded, burned, and out of ammunition. This reveals a psychological principle rarely discussed. The human body gives up long before the human spirit does. Modern life conditions people to stop at the first sign of discomfort. When tired, rest. When stressed, withdraw. When challenged, retreat. Murphy's endurance shows a different reality. Pain does not define your limit. Exhaustion does not define your limit. Fear does not define your limit. Your limit is defined by what you are unwilling to abandon. Murphy did not have superhuman strength. He had superhuman resolve. Murphy's stand at Holtzweier is a study in leadership as moral responsibility. He did not lead from behind. He did not issue orders he himself was unwilling to follow. When the choice came to risk his life or preserve it, he chose the former not because he wanted glory, but because leadership demands sacrifice. True leadership is not power. True leadership is burden. And burden accepted willingly becomes influence earned permanently. Murphy's men followed him into the counterattack, not because he was the highest-ranking officer. They followed him because he had just shown, beyond doubt, that he valued their lives more than his own. This is a timeless principle. People follow courage they can trust. Murphy's legacy does not stem from his 33 decorations or his 241 credited kills. It stems from one impossible hour in the snow, one moment when circumstances stripped everything away except choice. Every life has such moments. Moments that compress all your abilities, fears, hopes, and character into a single decision. We rarely recognize these moments when they arrive. They are disguised as emergencies, tragedies, crises, or impossible tasks. But history tells us that 1 hour, one decision, can redefine a human life. Murphy did not plan to become a symbol. He simply chose not to abandon the men behind him. In an age when people are easily discouraged, easily offended, easily shaken, Murphy's story confronts us with uncomfortable questions. What excuses do we cling to? What potential do we bury because others fail to see it? What responsibilities do we avoid because they cost comfort? How many times do we let fear shape our choices? What would we do if everything depended on us? Murphy's life demands honest answers. We often overestimate the obstacles in our path and underestimate the strength within us. Murphy saw the opposite. His obstacles were vast, but his responsibility was greater. Murphy did not live long, only 45 years, yet his legacy endures because character outlives longevity. He did not leave behind theories or manifestos. He left something far more powerful. An example of a man who endured hardship without bitterness, accepted responsibility without complaint, faced fear without surrender, led without ego, fought without hatred, acted when no one else would. Murphy's story is not a call to seek danger. It is a call to seek integrity, not a call to be extraordinary by chance, but extraordinary by choice. What makes Murphy unforgettable is not that he survived impossible odds, but that he chose to face them. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't wait for backup. He didn't wait for certainty. He acted because someone had to act, and that may be the greatest lesson his life offers. Greatness is rarely convenient. It arrives when everything is falling apart. Holtzweier was not a stage built for a hero. It was a grave waiting for 18 men. But because Murphy stood where others could not, the grave remained empty, and his name entered history. There is a point in every human life where excuses stop and truth begins. Most people spend their years avoiding that point, navigating around hardship, dodging responsibility, choosing comfort over growth. But life has a way of revealing us, of putting us in situations where who we truly are becomes visible, not only to the world but to ourselves. Audie Murphy met that point in a frozen field in Alsace, but his story is not about war. War was merely the backdrop that exposed the foundation of his character. His story teaches us something universal. Courage is not a gift reserved for a chosen few. It is a decision available to everyone. To understand that decision, we must look deeper into the forces that shaped him. Pain is a forge. It bends some people, it breaks others, and in rare cases, it tempers them into something unshakable. Murphy's childhood was that forge. Growing up in poverty, caring for siblings, watching illness and abandonment to dismantle the family he loved. These were not dramatic events. They were slow, grinding realities. The kind of realities that teach lessons no school can offer. No one is coming to save you. Complaints solve nothing. The world does not pause for your pain. You can endure more than you think. In modern life, adversity is often viewed as an obstacle to happiness. But Murphy's life reframes adversity as the foundation of strength. The nights he spent hunting to feed his siblings were not heroic, they were necessary. Yet that necessity produced self-reliance. It produced discipline. It produced someone who had already learned, at a young age, that survival demands focus and emotional stability. The body grows from nutrition. Character grows from hardship. Murphy's story reminds us that we should not wish for an easier life, but for the strength to face the life we have. When people looked at Murphy, they saw a small frame and a youthful face. The Marines saw it. The paratroopers saw it. Even his drill sergeants saw it. But Murphy did not measure himself by how others measured him. That is a rare form of courage, internal courage, the courage to define your identity independently of external judgment. Most of us allow others to draw our limits for us. We accept their labels. We internalize their doubts. We let their perception become our ceiling. Murphy demonstrates a powerful truth. Being underestimated can be an advantage if you refuse to underestimate yourself. There is quiet power in the person others overlook. They do not see you coming. They do not expect you to endure. They do not imagine you capable of altering the fate of all around you. Yet history is full of lives like Murphy's lives that prove potential is not something others grant you. It is something you claim for yourself. Fear is often misunderstood. People think courage is the opposite of fear, but that is not true. Courage is the relationship you build with fear. Murphy did not eliminate fear. He mastered its timing. Fear tells you where danger is. Courage tells you when to ignore it. On the M10, surrounded by incoming fire, fear served a purpose. It sharpened Murphy's instincts, clarified his decisions, and kept him alive. But fear never made the decisions for him. That is the difference between paralysis and purpose. In life, fear often arrives at the exact moment action is required. It whispers reasons to wait, reasons to hesitate, reasons to retreat. But courage, true courage, arrives when you say, even if I am afraid, I will act. IASIA. Fear comes uninvited. Courage is chosen. Few lessons in Murphy's story are more profound than his sense of duty. Duty is not about orders. It is not about rank or medals or institutional loyalty. Duty is about people, specifically the people who rely on you. Murphy did not stay on that field out of nationalism or ideology. He stayed because 18 exhausted, wounded, frozen men depended on him to do something impossible. This reveals a universal principle. Responsibility gives courage its purpose. Without responsibility, courage becomes recklessness. With responsibility, courage becomes leadership. Murphy's sense of duty transcended self-preservation, not because he lacked fear, but because he understood the weight of his position. Every leader, whether in war, business, family, or community, eventually faces a moment where they must choose between what is easy and what is right. Murphy made his choice instantly, and that choice teaches us that leadership is not about authority. It is about self-sacrifice. Leaders do not stand in front because they crave attention. They stand in front because they refuse to let others face danger alone. History often turns on vast forces: economics, politics, technology, ideology, but sometimes it turns on one person who refuses to surrender. If Murphy had retreated with his men, if he had stayed in the tree line, if he had waited for someone else to take the risk, Company B would have been overrun. One man, 1 hour, one decision. That decision changed everything. This is the lesson that extends far beyond war. Your life will be defined by a handful of decisions. Decisions made under pressure. Decisions where no one can guide you. Decisions where safety is tempting, but responsibility is calling. Murphy did not have time to strategize. He did not draft a plan. He acted from instinct, shaped by years of hardship and responsibility. And because of that, 18 families would later welcome their sons home. We underestimate how often one person can alter outcomes far larger than themselves. Courage is contagious, but so is hesitation. Murphy showed the world that the moment you decide not to retreat, the entire shape of fate bends around that refusal. One of the least appreciated aspects of Murphy's stand was his emotional control. He fired short bursts, tracked targets methodically, prioritized threats, and made rapid-fire calculations, even as his environment deteriorated around him. That composure did not come from training, it came from temperament, forged in hardship. In life, many of us lose our composure over far smaller challenges: criticism, financial stress, arguments, uncertainty, unmet expectations. We react impulsively, emotionally, or defensively. Murphy teaches a powerful counter lesson. In crisis, the calmest person has the most power. Composure allows clarity. Clarity enables effective action. Effective action turns hopeless situations into survivable ones. Your emotions may scream at you, but you do not have to obey them. Courage begins when emotional control replaces emotional chaos. Murphy never saw himself as extraordinary. He downplayed his actions. He refused to glorify his own courage. He insisted that he had only done what anyone else would have done, but anyone did not do it. The world often misunderstands greatness. It looks for dramatic personalities, loud confidence, charismatic presence. Yet Murphy was quiet, small, humble. What he possessed was far more powerful: internal consistency between what he believed and what he did. He believed his men's lives mattered more than his own, so he acted accordingly. Greatness is almost always quiet like this. It emerges not from ego, but from alignment between values and action. Stories like Murphy's survive only if someone chooses to remember them. The world moves fast, too fast. Heroes fade from public knowledge as trends drown out history. But memory is part of moral inheritance. If we forget the people who endured the unimaginable so others could live, we forget the lessons that make society stronger. Murphy's grave at Arlington is one of the most visited, not because he was famous in Hollywood, but because people feel something when they stand before the headstone of a man who gave more than he ever asked for. We visit graves to remind ourselves that courage existed, and therefore can exist again. We retell these stories because they challenge us to ask, what kind of person do I want to be? What will I do when everything is on the line? Will I stand or will I fold? Murphy's answer is carved into history. Courage does not feel good in the moment. It burns. It wounds. It costs. It demands a price that comfort never will. Murphy's courage left scars, physical, emotional, psychological. He carried nightmares after the war. He carried the weight of survival long after the bullet stopped. Courage is not glamorous. It is costly. But the alternative, cowardice, abandonment, regret, costs far more. Murphy shows that a meaningful life is not created through comfort. It is created through the willingness to bear discomfort for the sake of what matters. Pain passes, fear fades, wounds heal, but the honor of having done the right thing, that endures. And so does the shame of having run. Murphy chose honor. He chose burden. He chose responsibility. He chose to stand when standing seemed absurd. And because of that choice, his story still moves us today. There comes a point in every extraordinary story where the details of the event fade and the deeper question emerges. What does this say about the human spirit? Because the truth is this: the world is full of battles, full of wars, full of men and women who faced impossible odds, but very few leave behind a story that remains alive decades later, told, retold.